Hi, I'm Dr. Neal Barnard. You know, we all have ideas about food, and sometimes these ideas bring us in the right direction, making us make better choices. But sometimes our ideas can bring us in the wrong direction, getting us into trouble. So today, I want to talk with you about 10 deadly food myths. Number one, you can wait to change your diet. You know, many people imagine that they can just eat with abandon when they're young and start to improve their diets only later on when they have a heart problem or something like that. Well, often the first sign of heart disease is a heart attack. And food habits can also lead to cancer and stroke, and they can arrive with no warning at all. So the time to improve your eating habits is not 20 years down the road, it's right now. And what does that mean? The foods to emphasize are 4 groups: vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. The more they're part of our routine, the better we're going to do. Myth number 2. A lot of people say exercise can take the place of a healthy diet. You know what I'm talking about. People will say, well, I don't eat well, but I can burn it off. Well, exercise burns far fewer calories than you might imagine. To prove it, go to the gym. Hop on the treadmill and run flat out for a mile and wipe your brow and press the little button that tells you how many calories you've burned. It's only about 100 calories for a mile. That's less than half the calories in a typical soda bottle. So exercise is healthful, but it's no substitute for a healthy diet if you want to lose weight. Myth number 3. Carbs are fattening and low-carb diets are healthful. You hear so many people say that. I want to lose weight, so I'm avoiding the bread and the potatoes and the rice and the pasta. I'm avoiding the carbohydrates. Here's the truth. Carbohydrates, wherever it's from, have only 4 calories per gram, but fats have 9. So if I'm comparing bread, which is high in carbohydrate, 4 calories per gram, but any kind of fat, chicken fat, beef fat, even olive oil, has 9 calories in every gram. So people in Japan, people in China, other Asian countries where they eat enormous amounts of rice and noodles and other carbohydrate-rich foods, well, they're the thinnest people on the planet. And only when the Western tastes bring meat and dairy products and greasy foods into these cultures in a big way did weight problems start to become a problem. So don't get the idea of avoiding carbs. It leads you in the wrong direction. Myth number 4, milk prevents bone breaks. Well, you might think so because milk has calcium, doesn't it? But studies show that children who drink milk have no better bone strength than children who drink little or no milk. And at Harvard, the Nurses' Health Study followed a group of women for an 18-year period, and what they found was that milk drinkers had no protection for their bones at all. So whether we're talking about kids or whether we're talking about older folks, milk is not going to protect you from bone breaks. Don't get me wrong. You do need calcium, and you can get it from greens and beans, healthy foods. You also need sunlight, which gives you the vitamin D to help you absorb calcium. And don't forget exercise. That gives your bones a reason to live. But don't subscribe to that myth that milk is going to protect your bones. Myth number 5. We all grew up with this one. You need red meat for iron. You know what I'm talking about. The fact is, iron is found in many foods, including the healthiest foods like green leafy vegetables and beans. In those foods, the foods from plants, it's in a special form called non-heme iron. It has a real advantage. The iron in those foods is more absorbable if your body is low in iron. It's less absorbable if you already have plenty of iron in your body. Now, meat contains a form of iron called heme iron, which tends to be more absorbable regardless of your body's needs, and that's not good. If you're on a meaty diet, you're likely to end up with too much iron. No, you don't need red meat for iron. You're going to get it from green leafy vegetables and beans in a form your body can really use. Myth number 6, you need animal products for protein. I still hear people say, if a person is eating a vegetarian kind of diet, where do they get their protein? Well, there's actually plenty of protein in beans, grains, and even vegetables. Broccoli doesn't like to brag, but it's about 30% protein as a percentage of its calories. So if you include vegetables and whole grains and beans in your daily routine, you'll get all the protein you need without any special combinations. Now, Does it matter how food is prepared, say boiled or steamed or fried? Well, the vitamin content is usually higher for foods that are lightly cooked, steamed for example, compared with foods that have been overcooked. But as far as protein goes, the style of cooking has very little effect. You don't need the animal products. You'll get it from vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. Myth number 7. Chicken is healthier than beef. So many people say that, but here are the numbers. The leanest beef is about 29% fat as a percentage of calories. The leanest chicken is about 23%. That's not much difference. For comparison, beans, grains, vegetables, and fruits, they're mostly under 10% fat, and they're essentially cholesterol-free. But chicken is particularly high in the disease-causing bacteria. You've heard about salmonella and others? That's why the package label implores you to cook it thoroughly. But to tell you the truth, you're better off leaving it off your shopping list altogether. Now, a lot of people imagine that chicken is health food, and Americans now eat more than 1 million chickens per hour. And we're in the worst shape we've ever been in. You don't need it. Myth 8, salmon is slimming. You know, fish do have good fat. Fish contain these good fats, they're called omega-3 fatty acids, but that's only about 15 to 30% of the fat in fish. The remaining 70 to 85% isn't omega-3 at all. It's a mixture of saturated fats and various other kinds of fats that you don't need. And remember, every gram of fat has what? 9 calories. Well, Atlantic salmon is about 40% fat. Chinook salmon is about 50% fat. So they're very heavy in calories that can pad your waistline. When I see a real salmon aficionado, they very often are struggling with their weight. Salmon is not slimming. Myth 9, a glass of wine every day is good for you? Well, actually wine is a double-edged sword. People who have about 1 drink per day do seem to have fewer heart attacks and slightly less risk of Alzheimer's disease compared to teetotalers. But even 1 drink, if it's every day, increases a woman's risk of breast cancer. So if you do drink, keep it modest, keep it intermittent. Myth 10, everything in moderation. You hear people say this, right? But the idea of everything in moderation only applies to healthy things. Obviously, we don't recommend cigarettes in moderation or heroin in moderation. We don't recommend unhealthful foods in moderation either. Here's where it makes sense. A child might like to play the violin, but after 6 or 8 hours, it might be a good idea to go for a walk or do some homework. It's the same with healthy foods. We might like broccoli, but you don't want to have all broccoli all the time. So people who have moderate amounts of meat or other cholesterol-containing foods as a group are considerably less healthy than people who avoid them completely. So all things in moderation, yes, if it relates to healthy foods, but if something's bad for your health, leave it off completely. While we're at it, let me give you one more myth. This is myth number 11. You hear people say, organic doesn't matter. Some research studies have questioned whether organic produce is any better than conventional produce. And you'll hear people say, well, it just really doesn't make any difference. But there are really 2 key questions. First, is organic produce higher in vitamins and minerals? And here the answer is probably not. An apple is an apple, regardless of whether it was treated with pesticides or produced organically. But the second question is, does organic produce have fewer traces of pesticides or other toxins? And here, the answer is definitely yes. Organic produce is cleaner. And that's a big plus, because pesticide traces are suspect in cancer, in birth defects, and it makes sense to avoid them as much as you possibly can. So there you have it. Those are the deadly food myths. I hope you found this helpful and that you're able to make good choices for yourself and for your family. For the best of health. Thanks a lot.